Thanks, Glenn, for that kind introduction and for inviting me here today. Some of you may know this, but most of you probably don't, that Glenn and I actually worked together a number of years ago. It seems like a long time ago, but I can credit Glenn with teaching me a lot of the technical terms that I've come to use every day in my work on radio regulations. So I think of Glenn as one of my early tutors, in fact, on broadcast engineering. So Glenn, if I'm looking to you to bail me out if I get into trouble here in my talking. Glenn and my friend David Lair have talked to me about this broadcast symposium many times in the past, so I was very excited to be invited to attend in person and spend a little time speaking with you. I've never attended in the past because, as you probably guessed from the introduction, I'm not an engineer, and I hate to admit this to you, but I don't even have a Bachelor of Science degree. I was, in fact, an international studies major undergrad and then went to law school. It's not a confession designed to encourage you to pull out your phones and tune me out right now, but I just wanted to make that clear in case I misstate anything technical. I ask for your forgiveness in advance. I know this is a tough crowd. Having said that, for those of you that don't know me, I should explain a little about myself. I spent much of my professional life working on technical issues focused on primarily on radio, but a few other things. As Glenn mentioned, I joined the FCC 8 months ago at the end of January. And at the FCC, I supervise a staff of 19 engineers, but only 12 lawyers. It's kind of an interesting setup there. And as Glenn mentioned before that, I was general counsel at Ubiquity Digital Corporation, which, as you know, since it seems that many of the presenters here are former or current Ubiquity people, it's the developer of the HD radio system. At Ubiquity, I was in charge of the legal work, which I know you don't want to hear about, but I was also responsible for the regulatory and standard setting work. And as Glenn mentioned, Glenn and I actually did spend many years developing the test program for the company and implementing that and presenting that publicly both to the FCC and into the industry, which ultimately led to the adoption of the HD radio standard. So I may not know how to put the pipes together or the wires together or to write the software, but I've listened to endless hours of test audio and I've read tons of test reports, and so I like to think of myself as being able to talk about some technical things. But that's enough about me. What I really want to talk about is I'd like to focus my time on an update about what's going on at the audio division at the FCC, what we've been working on, and some things that I see coming down the pike. As Glenn mentioned, the audio division handles all of the licensing for AM, FM, FM booster, translator, and LPFM stations. We have more than 25,500 station licenses that we administer. And as many of you probably know better than I did before I got to the FCC, we handle an intense amount of paperwork. I cannot express to you how amazed I am every day by the sheer volume of paper that we process. So for those of you that deal with our processing staff, please be nice to them. They have a lot going on. Their lives are not easy. The most visible initiative, I think, at the audio division over the past 18 months has been the focus on translator stations. I'm referring to licensing new cross-service translator stations as part of our AM revitalization efforts. These are FM translator stations licensed to AM stations to rebroadcast the AM stations programming. Some of you probably participated in Auction 99 and Auction 100 at the Commission. My condolences to any of you that have been unfortunate enough to be involved in Auction 83, which is now in its 15th year at the Commission. But hopefully wrapping up soon, any day now. As of the end of September, we had issued approximately 1,560 new translator authorizations to AM stations. In Auction 99, we granted 968 authorizations out of 1,081 short form applications received. As you can see, the vast majority of things that have come to us. At this point, we only have a handful of applications left to resolve due to siting or environmental issues. And I will point out that we accomplished that in less than a year from the date of filing of the applications. In fact, 88% of the applications we received were granted within 2 months of filing. In Auction 100, we've already granted construction permits for 592 of 874 applications we received. And last week, we released a public notice inviting remaining singletons in that proceeding to file their long-form applications. That filing window opened October 4th, and parties have until November 5th to file. If you're working with any of those applicants, please make sure you get your forms in on time. We do not grant extensions to late filers. After we resolve these singletons, we'll have 27 mutually exclusive applicants in 13 groups. We're about to release another public notice announcing bidding scheduled for the first quarter of next year for those remaining mutually exclusive applications. So we've got a lot going on with translators. I'll stop patting myself or patting the audio division on the back about what a great job we're doing putting out new licenses. Let's talk next about some of the problems that has caused. All these new translator stations have also meant more interference complaints from full service stations and other existing translators. We've seen the emergence of kind of a cottage industry out there that's devoted to creative ways to prove interference. It seems to me that half the industry is looking for listeners to file interference complaints, while the other half is trying to incentivize the complaining listeners to go away. We at the FCC are kind of caught in the middle of that whole process. We have multiple people working on interference complaints on a full-time basis. I can tell you that's not a lot of fun. I only get copied on a minority of the filings, but I see multiple filings each week and sometimes multiple filings each day complaining about translator interference. So what are we trying to do about this? We're trying to address this with a new rulemaking proceeding on translator interference. The basic goal is to give some more structure to the process, to set some new rules of the road. And we'd like to make it a little more predictable for the industry to know when we will find interference. We received approximately 100 comments and reply comments in this open proceeding that we have going on right now. Our NPRM proposed a number of new rules. I won't go over all of them. I'm sure you'll be disappointed about that. But I want to mention a few of our ideas. I think the most important change we've proposed is to allow translators that are causing interference to move to any available frequency rather than restricting them to first, second, or third adjacent channels. We hope this additional flexibility will help eliminate interference in the vast majority of cases. I'm pleased that this proposal has received strong support in the comments, and that's important to us. But if that doesn't solve anything, there's some other thoughts we've had. As part of this is we want to limit frivolous and abusive claims of interference. That's why we proposed that there needs to be at least 6 listener complaints and why we set out what is required for a bona fide complaint to be filed. I thought our proposals were pretty much common sense and was surprised to see that there have actually been a lot of comments and a lot of issues that have been raised about some of the things that we proposed. But I think it's likely we will try to incorporate many of our proposals in our final order or final rules. At the same time we want to eliminate or reduce frivolous complaints, we're also working to eliminate what I think of as kind of a war of attrition that some translator stations have been engaged in to counter real interference complaints. One main goal of ours is to take the listener out of the equation so they're not involved in that fight, and to eliminate the ability of translator stations to buy off listeners that complain. We want to have real instances of interference actually resolved, not by people going away, but dealing with those interference issues. So again, I expect that we will try to include many of our proposals on those issues in our final rules. But another part of our goal here was to harmonize the way we analyze interference, so we have predicted interference for station applications, and we also have a way of analyzing actual interference in the field. So for those of you that are interested in our rules, I'm really referring to 74-1204 versus 74-1203. We'd like to harmonize our standards under those two parts of our rules, and that's part of the goal of this proceeding. We don't want to authorize new translator stations under one standard and then have the station fail our test for a stricter standard once they're on the air. We hope any final rules we adopt are going to address this problem. As we expected, the most controversial aspect of our NPRM has been our proposal to create a contour beyond which we will not examine interference complaints. I have personally read many of the comments and found numerous thoughtful and helpful comments on this topic. In particular, I appreciate those commenters that have tried to help us define the range of listenability for FM stations to better understand where potential translator interference might cause real harm to full-service FM stations. The technical analyses we received have been very helpful. I think we've heard loudly and clearly that there's a lot of consternation about our proposal to use the 54 dBu contour as an outer limit for when we will consider interference complaints. Predictably, some people, mostly representing translator interests, love the idea because it kind of limits the range of complaints. Full service stations, on the other hand, have hated the idea. I hope those of you that are following this rulemaking proceeding appreciate that we're trying to strike a balance between the need to protect our full service stations from interference while at the same time working to ensure the success of the thousands of new translator stations that in many cases are the key to economic stability for AM. I want to assure you that we've heard the concerns and we'll give the comments a very thorough review as we attempt to strike the right balance between these interests. We're actively working on this and we'll have more to say on it soon. Unfortunately, I don't control the timing of these things, but my goal is to fast track this order on this topic because there's a lot of stuff going on out there about interference. I hope you will find that the approach we ultimately adopt helps provide clarity to the industry, and I hope we have something more to share with you soon. A few more thoughts about translators. I was at the NAB radio show in Orlando 2 weeks ago and was approached by several AM broadcasters that delivered the same message to me. FM translators have saved their business. They've said they could not survive economically without this option. Please keep that in mind if you're involved in any of these fights going on between translator stations and full service stations. The success of translators is not merely academic for a lot of these broadcasters. As I mentioned earlier, we see in many cases full-blown war going on between full-service stations and translators over claims of interference. We receive filings, counter-filings, and more filings. We receive competing technical analyses that go on forever. A lot of this is not particularly helpful for us. We want to address actual cases of interference. We do not want to be drawn into economic fights between competitors. This is an area where everyone in the industry can help. Detailed technical findings and technical analyses are going to get a lot more attention than just unsupported claims of interference. And please work to present information to us in a way that is consistent with our current methodologies. That will greatly speed up the resolution process. We see way too many filings that are offering innovative and different ways of analyzing things that really are not consistent with our methodologies. One last thing about translators I'll mention. You may have heard that we recently denied an experimental application from a station seeking permission to turn off its analog AM broadcast and rely exclusively on its FM translator. We're looking to help revitalize AM. We're not looking to get rid of it. You can imagine why we denied that request. There are a few other topics I want to mention. As you know, we recently received comments in response to our notice of inquiry concerning a new Class C4 for FM stations. These Class C4 proponents believe allowing stations to upgrade is critical for economic success of many stations. But critics have expressed strong concern about adding new interference into the FM band, particularly in light of all the new translator stations that we've recently licensed. Of all the issues in our C4 proceeding, I suspect you're most interested in our questions concerning the proposal to create a procedure where an FM station in the non-reserve band, regardless of zone or station class, could be designated as a Section 73-215 facility, resulting in interference protection based on its actual authorized operating parameters rather than class maximums. This would be the case only if the station has continuously operated with an ERP or height above average terrain below its class maximum for 10 years. From our initial review of our comments, this seems to be the most contentious issue we will have to address in the proceeding. We're not surprised to see that proponents of this new Class C4 support this proposal, because putting those limits on existing stations will allow us to authorize more facilities to upgrade to Class C4. We're also not surprised to see incumbent stations very upset about this. We'll be looking at these issues in the review of our comments, and I hope we'll have more to say about this in the future. We have one additional rulemaking proceeding that I want to mention, which I'm sure interests many people. Last week, the Commission issued a second further notice of proposed rulemaking in our AM revitalization proceeding. That item follows up on earlier proposals concerning interference protection for Class A AM stations, the clear channel stations. In an earlier stage of this proceeding, we already proposed to reduce interference protection, to reduce nighttime protection for Class A stations in order to allow local AM stations to increase their nighttime power levels. That proposal would have curtailed protection for nighttime skywave service from Class A stations in return for helping local stations provide better nighttime service. No one seemed happy with our earlier proposal. People who see skywave as anachronistic wanted us to go farther. Class A stations want us to continue to protect skywave service. As we mentioned in the item that we just released, a third group supports changes in the interference protection, but felt our proposal was just not technically sound. That group felt we were proposing to protect listening in areas that are currently unlistenable today. We've taken some time, and we've taken many of the comments into account in our new proposals. The new proposal represents a tweak of what we said in the past, rather than a totally new approach. Essentially, we're addressing what that third group said. And so what we have done here is we've proposed two alternatives on how to calculate protection for Class A stations. But both proposals reduce protection for skywave service in return for helping local stations. The new proposal would limit power increases for many local stations, however, in a compromise that we hope will reduce the impact on Class A ground wave service. We hope that addresses some concerns of Class A stations, although I'm under no illusion that we'll receive an industry consensus on this topic. I also fully appreciate the concern many people have about curtailing skywave service. As with the translator interference rulemaking, we're trying to strike the right balance here. Your input on our proposals will be very helpful. I want to point out a few things about this topic. We want input from the industry about which of the two proposals we've put forward is the correct technical approach to take. We're not looking to re-argue the question of whether we should change Class A protection. We want your input on which methodology is better. As we said in the item we released last week, we remain committed to our previous decision to explore ways to improve local service for AM stations, even if it means a reduction in skywave service. We have very intentionally not expressed a preference between the two proposals that we've put out there. We want your views. Also, we're very interested in the question of whether or not our proposals would have any impact on the EAS or on IPAWS. We don't think it would, but we'd like to build a technical record about that, and so if anyone has any views on that issue, we would love to hear your response to that. Finally, I want to highlight a question that Commissioner O'Reilly put out in a separate statement with the order. It will be helpful for us to receive more detailed technical input on the question of whether the ground wave signal is listenable outside the 0.5 millivolt per meter contour. All I can say at this point is we look forward to your input on our questions, and I hope we can move this proposal forward at a faster pace than the earlier phase of this proceeding. Continuing on the AM theme, I was pleased to have the opportunity to sit through the discussion a little bit earlier this morning about the interesting all-digital AM testing that Hubbard Radio and Xperia have been conducting in Frederick, Maryland. The audio division has a long history of support for the transition to digital radio, and that predates my arrival at the Commission. The presentations I've seen here and at the radio show on the Frederick tests are very encouraging. I know from my experience at Ubiquity that the quality improvement of digital can make a huge difference for AM to become more competitive. We look forward to seeing a detailed test report about the Frederick tests and the industry input on those tests. I believe there'll be more discussions later today about all digital FM service. I encourage the industry and the NAB to keep us informed with formal test reports as the industry moves forward with those test efforts. One other new initiative I want to mention is the Commission's recent incubator program. I know this doesn't involve technical issues, but it's a new program that we're excited about, so I thought it was worth mentioning. For those of you who have not heard about this, the Commission adopted an order in August that encourages existing broadcasters to provide training, operational expertise, and financial assistance to new entrants in the radio business in return for relief on the ownership caps. The way this will work is pretty straightforward. An existing broadcaster agrees to incubate a new entrant or a failing existing station for 3 years. The incubating entity helps the incubated entity with the development of programming, selling ads, building out its station infrastructure, and developing a staff. If the incubating entity does this for the 3-year incubation period, at the end of that time, we will grant that entity a certificate that can be used to buy a station in a comparable market, even if that exceeds the ownership caps. We're looking for both incubators and incubatees interested in participating, so please spread the word about this if you know anyone that might be interested. Before I finish, I want to talk for a minute about what I see coming down the pike. As part of our media modernization efforts at the Commission has been trying to eliminate unnecessary rules and regulations. Most of that effort is focused on TV and cable, or record keeping that impacts all broadcast services. I hope we'll have time next year to look to clean up some of the AM and FM rules as well, including the technical rules. We have some ideas already of rules that we've identified that could be targeted for change or elimination. But if you have your favorite outdated rule or something that you think is useless, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'd love to hear that. Looking to next year, I also want to point out that next year is the commencement of our next radio renewal cycle. Although renewals do not usually raise a lot of engineering issues, I hope everyone in the industry will take the upcoming renewal cycle seriously. Now is the time for stations to get their paperwork in order, particularly the online public inspection file. We have an unfortunate number of stations that have not even started that process. Fixing these paperwork problems now will greatly accelerate the process of renewal applications for everyone, and most importantly, will make my job much, much easier in the future. Finally, a topic that is consuming a lot of our internal resources and which you do not see, but you will see soon, and that will impact you next year, is the upcoming change in our database system. The audio division is going to be moving all its files and forms from the existing CDBS system to the LMS platform that is currently used for TV matters. We're pretty far along in that process, and we're importing audio division forms into LMS and setting up a process for future filings to come through LMS. I expect this to start rolling out with new forms in the next 2 or 3 months, and the remaining forms will transition to LMS early next year. Many, if not most of you, are probably already familiar with LMS from work on video issues. But for those of you that live in an audio-centric world like me, this may be a bit more of a jarring transition. But we'd like your help in the process. It is inevitable that we'll have technical glitches and that there'll be mistakes. We want you to calmly bring those to our attention when you find them so we can fix things. Please no screaming, no yelling. Let us know if you have problems, large or small. We actually view this as an iterative process with the industry to get this right. We'll give you guidance on who to reach out to at the time when we get started, but please keep this in mind when we get there. The last thing I want to do is just to express some thanks to the terrific staff at the audio division. I think probably all of you know Jim Bradshaw, who heads our engineering staff and keeps things running smoothly. Many of you probably work with Rudy Bonacci, our FM lead, and Sun Nagoyan, our AM lead. They both accomplish an incredible amount with very limited resources. I'm sure many of you have worked with our legal staff, Lisa Scanlon, Mike Wagner, and Tom Hutton. Again, I could not get my job done without everything that they're doing every day. I'm really thankful for the staff and how much they are able to accomplish. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of them or to me if we can answer any questions or help in any way. We are always available. Thanks for inviting me to join you today, and I hope the rest of your meeting is productive. I will be here for a while after lunch. If people have questions I can answer, feel free to come up to me, or if you want to share any of your thoughts about the radio industry, I'd be happy to hear about it. Thanks very much.